The studio was still trembling from the verbal earthquake that had just ripped across the set, but Senator John Kennedy didn't move an inch. He leaned back in his chair, completely calm, while Joy Behar tried to gather herself, flipping through her cue cards as if one of them held the escape route she desperately needed. The audience sat frozen, some with their hands over their mouths, others staring at Kennedy as though he had just walked straight into a hornet's nest and walked out untouched. Joy inhaled sharply, eager to take back control. "Senator, this isn't a comedy club," she snapped. "This is a serious conversation." Kennedy tilted his head, eyebrows raised in that deceptively polite sudden way, and replied, "Joy, I'm being serious. I just use smaller words so more folks can understand them." The crowd erupted, half in shock, half in laughter. And Joy went palled, realizing she had walked right into the punchline. She recovered quickly, or at least she tried, tapping her pen against her mug in frustration while Kennedy watched like someone observing a cat try to climb a glass door. "This show," Joy said sharply, "is about intelligent debate, not whatever it is you're doing." Kennedy nodded as though she had complimented him. "Exactly," he said. "Intelligent debate, so maybe we should stick to facts instead of feelings dressed up like facts." Joy stiffened, her jaw tightening as she fired back something about protecting democracy. But Kennedy was faster. "Democracy," he repeated. "Joy, the way you use that word, I'm beginning to think you believe it means they agreeing with you at all times." Laughter rolled through the audience again, even from the crew. And Joy's eyes flashed, realizing she was losing the room. Desperate to regain footing, Joy leaned forward and tried to challenge his voting record, slamming her notes on the desk theatrically. But Kennedy didn't even look at them. "I've read plenty of fiction, Joy," he said, pointing at her stack of papers. "And yours is still the most creative." Even the co-hosts looked stunned. One muttered, "Oh my God," under their breath. Joy, flustered, tried to interrupt, but Kennedy held up a hand gently. "I promise I'll let you finish," he said softly. "But I'm not going to let you rewrite the truth while you're at it." The audience applauded so loudly that cameras had to readjust their levels. Joy tried the personal angle next. "A risky move. Maybe," she said coldly. "You should spend less time making jokes and more time focusing on the real problems in this country." Kennedy didn't blink. "Oh, I do," he answered smoothly. "But sometimes the real problem is the folks yelling on TV instead of listening." The room fell absolutely silent. Joy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. It was as though Kennedy had flipped a switch and turned off her microphone, even though the power was very much still on. She tried again, changing tactics mid-sentence, stumbling over her own rebuttal while Kennedy watched patiently. "You know, Senator," Joy said, forcing a laugh, "you're good at dodging questions." Kennedy's smile widened. "Joy," he replied, "if I'm dodging anything, it's the traps you keep setting for yourself." The audience hollered a full-on shout, and Joy slammed her palm onto the desk in frustration, her composure slipping like water through cupped hands. At this point, the producers were panicking, waving frantic signals from behind the cameras, trying to reel the show back into something resembling order. But Kennedy wasn't done. "Look," he said kindly, almost too kindly. "I appreciate spirited debate truly, but it works best when both people are playing the same sport." Joy, voice trembling now, retorted, "Oh, and what sport is that?" Kennedy leaned forward. "Truth teller versus storyteller." Another explosion of applause. Joy finally tried to cut to commercial, but Kennedy spoke first, gently, but with enough force to silence the entire studio. "Joy, I'm going to say this with all respect." He said, "You're smart, you're passionate, but sometimes you confuse talking the loudest with being the most right." Joy froze. Even the co-hosts avoided looking at her. The camera zoomed in, capturing Joy's stunned expression. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open. The rare look of someone who had run out of arguments live on national television. Kennedy gave her a small polite nod. "Now," he said, "if you want to keep going, I'm happy to continue, but maybe this time let's both try listening." Joy swallowed hard, her voice thin as she finally muttered, "Well, a broken bar, be right back." The music kicked in, but the damage was already done as the crew rushed onto the set and the lights dimmed for commercial. Joy leaned back in her chair, shaken while Kennedy adjusted his tie with the coma of someone who had simply corrected an item on a grocery list. Off-camera whispers filled the studio, crew members, co-hosts, even the security guys talking in low voices. Everyone agreed on one thing. Joy Behar had never been shut down like that before. And as they counted down back to air, Joyce stared at her reflection in the monitor, replaying the entire exchange in her mind, every blow, every applause break, every moment she lost control. Meanwhile, John Kennedy just smiled, folded his hands, and waited for the red light to come back, an all-broken bar ready for round 2. The tension in the studio was palpable the moment John Kennedy took his seat across from Joy Behar. Cameras rolled, capturing every subtle shift in expression, every flicker of doubt and defiance. What began as a routine interview quickly escalated into an intense confrontation when Behar attempted to corner Kennedy on a political topic that had been dominating headlines for weeks. Her questions, sharp and loaded, seemed to be designed to provoke, to force a reaction. Kennedy, however, remained calm, his posture composed, his gaze steady. The audience could sense immediately that this was not going to be the typical exchange. This was a battle with experience and control over the narrative. Joy leaned forward, pointing slightly, her voice carrying both curiosity and accusation. "Senator Kennedy, aren't you worried that your latest proposal undermines the very people you claim to represent? How do you respond to the criticism that it favors corporate interests over ordinary citizens?" Kennedy paused, measured, choosing each word with precision. "Joy, with all due respect," he began. "Your framing assumes an opposition where there is none. The proposal in question is designed to strengthen communities, to empower families with real opportunities. To suggest otherwise is a misunderstanding of both intention and impact," the studio audience murmured. Sensing the shift in power, Kennedy had not only deflected the question, he had reframed the debate on his terms. Better pressed, refusing to relent. "But Senator, critics say this could have unintended consequences. Aren't you concerned about that?" Kennedy's eyes narrowed slightly, and his tone carried a subtle edge. "Every policy has risks. Every initiative requires scrutiny, but leadership is not about avoiding difficult decisions out of fear of criticism. It's about making informed, responsible choices while being accountable." The calm, firm delivery left Behar momentarily at a loss for words. The live cameras captured her slight hesitation, a rare crack in her usually unflappable demeanor. The conversation shifted to a second topic, one that had ignited social media in the previous days. Kennedy's stance on a controversial bill. Better lean back, arms crossed, clearly preparing for another verbal jab. "Senator, millions are talking about this bill. How do you reconcile the public outcry with your voting record?" Kennedy's reply was swift, precise, and delivered with an air of authority. "Joy, my record is a reflection of principle, not pandering to headlines. It is easy to criticize from the sidelines, but governing requires balancing.